Good morning. Good morning to everyone, wherever you are throughout the Southeast. Welcome to another edition of our Ask the Expert series. Today, we'll be discussing electric vehicle charging stations, how boards can determine if implementing them is right for their community, and how to get the process rolling. On a side note, we've had a tremendous outpouring of interest in this subject. So clearly, this is a hot topic throughout common interest communities in Florida and throughout the Southeast. So we're excited to have a great discussion today. My name is Jake House. I'm a director at First Service Residential. I'll be moderating today's discussion. We have a couple housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any questions throughout the event, please submit them through the Q&A section in Zoom on your control panel, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as possible. No need to take notes. We'll be recording this session and sending it to all attendees. So if you have a board member, if you have someone who's interested in this topic who can't be here today, we will have a recording so that they can see that. And we've had a tremendous amount of people that can attend, who want that recording, so we'll get it to you. In addition, we'll be sharing a checklist that we developed to guide you through facilitating electrical vehicle charging stations in your community. We encourage you to review it, share it with your boards, anyone who's interested in this topic. All right, so we've got a wonderful rock star panel here today. Let's dive right in. Joining me are Robert J. Green, General Manager at the Bristol Palm Beach. We also have my colleague, Michael Hazel, Director of Engineering at the Bristol in Palm Beach. We have Chris Normandeau, who is our Director of First Service Energy and Value Engineering here at First Service Residential, really spearheads helping our communities with this very topic and other energy efficiency projects. We also have Jeff Rothy, Senior Partner Account Manager for the Southeast at ChargePoint. ChargePoint has the world's largest network of EV charging stations. So we're so happy to have this panel here today. Robert, would you like to say hello to everyone and introduce yourself? Oh, Robert, you're muted. Can you just unmute?
I did. Welcome, and we look forward to your questions, and hope you find some value in this session today.
Thanks, Robert. Michael?
Good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be a part of the panel.
Awesome. Robert and Michael work together, and I think one of the great takeaways from Robert and Michael is they've done it. They've done it at their property. They have implemented it. So we look forward to learning from them and how they implemented it and some lessons that we can take away from it. So Robert, Michael, thank you for being here. Chris?
Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for having me, Jake. I really appreciate the opportunity to discuss this topic. As you mentioned, it's really popular with folks. So eager to answer some questions and make things a little bit more easy to understand for folks.
Thanks, Chris. And also Jeff.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. All right, so as more Americans switch from gasoline to electric vehicles, there's a growing need for convenient, reliable ways to charge their cars at home. To meet that demand from residents, many associations, as we've already discussed, are considering EV charging stations for their community or their building. So today, our panel will discuss how to determine if an EV charging station program is right for your community, gauging if your community is properly equipped to handle that, and some of the issues around capacity, also the viability of your current electrical infrastructure. What we really want to do today is walk you through the steps of getting it off the ground and some of the issues to consider. And we've put together a great panel that can do that today. So let's jump right into the first question for Chris. How do communities that are considering EV charging stations get started? How do they get the ball rolling?
Great question. And I think the first step in that path, in that journey, is to really find out how much desire is there for it in the community, right? If it's something that nobody actually wants and it's just a concept, that's one thing that maybe we'll look at it, in the future, or maybe we want to set up some policies. But if it's more of a, we've got a dozen people that already have electric vehicles, that's a different story. So really it's finding out from the owners and the residents how much of an appetite is there for it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the basic ways to really gain interest is there's some great surveying technology out there to survey residents and get their feedback. And we're happy to share more information about how to correctly survey and which questions to ask to gauge that interest. Next question for Robert, to the implementation side. So what prompted Bristol of Palm Beach, your community, the board members to implement EV charging station? What prompted it? And then what role did you guys play in helping the board to get it off the ground and get the ball rolling?
First of all, we're a little unique because we're a brand new building, and our board at the time were the developers. So they were selling units, owners had interest in it, so we could place the positions of these chargers where their parking spaces were. We also had the other side of it for valet, because you're going to have guests, you have other cars that have charging stations. So Mike and I worked very closely with the developers and the owners to get these put in.
So not every community is brand new. Chris, can you just briefly talk about other types of communities and how how First Service and what you do from an FS Energy standpoint, how you can help them as well and get that project off the ground?
Absolutely, right. And Robert and Michael had a great opportunity in that Bristol was built with this in mind. And when that is available, it's fantastic. That being said, the vast majority of the homes that we live in and our residents live in are not as new or weren't as forward thinking. And there might be some capacity issues or some bottlenecks. So looking at it more as a conversation as opposed to a cookie cutter solution is really how I like to approach it. And when I'm working with a property, I'll sit down with the board, get a feeling for what is the desire, right? And where are your pain points? If there is very little electrical capacity, that's going to lead us down one route. If there's very few guest parking spaces, that's going to lead us down another route. So figuring out where the pain points are for a property and really what the desire is, because common element shared charging is going to be less expensive to implement generally, whereas individual chargers in parking spaces can be a thing that some people want. That being said, it can be more expensive. So we're looking at how and where to go.
Got it. Thank you, Chris. All right. So a community has surveyed their residents. There's engagement. This is a project they want to get rolling. Let's say a community has decided to move forward with EV charging stations. Jeff, can you talk to us a little bit about the different types of charging stations to consider and what should be talked about in that stage?
Yeah, I mean, as Chris mentioned, one of the most important things to wonder is, where is the station actually going to go? Is it going to be in personal parking or shared parking? So some things you want to look at is those two options. So you have personal charging stations where the owners are paying to have stations installed in their dedicated parking spaces versus community shared. I would say in the Southeast, probably 95 to 98% of charging stations going into communities are in a shared capacity, where the vehicles are coming in, charging for a few hours a day or every other day, and then going back to their parking space. Until you have a really large population of EVs, that seems to be the best way to go, especially for where we're at in the rate of adoption. You can put in a shared charging solution for the first 3 to 5 years, see how many cars show up, and then reevaluate your electrical needs, your budgetary needs, things like that, and give you time to prepare for the next step, 5 years from now. So with that, the next step is looking at how much power the building has. And that's probably the most important piece, especially if your building was built, more than 5 years ago. You probably don't have a lot of available power. So we really need to get an electrician involved to come out and do a survey of your building's existing power load and how much power the building has, and whether you need to do an upgrade from the utility or you have enough power, you can put in 1 or 2 shared stations right away.
So
Yeah.
I hear a lot about rapid charging stations versus, and, pardon me, I'm not the expert here, but versus other types. Can you briefly talk about the implications for those 2 types of chargers, rapid versus non-rapid?
Yeah, so I mean, what they call rapid or DC fast, or Tesla calls a supercharger. So that's a 480 volt high-speed charging solution. Nowhere on the East Coast has that ever been installed in multifamily community for many reasons. One is cost. The difference between a DC fast charger and a level 2, which is on a 240 volt charger, is about 9 times more expensive. So most buildings probably don't want to budget, $200,000 to put in a DC fast charging solution. So that's probably the biggest reason, but also those are really designed for corridor charging. It's equivalent of putting a gas station on your property. That's for when you're coming and going, you need to charge your building or your car really quickly. But for most multifamily communities, the cars are parked 10 to 12 hours or longer every day. So that's where you can get into a longer charging solution with level 2. It's much more cost effective. You can get a lot more cars charged in that time than you would through a DC fast solution.
And real quick, right? So Jeff, you mentioned level 1, level 2, level 3. Can you break out what level 1, level 2, and level 3 are for the folks on the call?
Yeah, so level 1 charging is just plugging into your standard wall outlet. So 110 volt. When you plug in your vehicle to that, you're going to get about 3 miles of range for every hour it's plugged in. So it's very, very slow. A lot of people call it trickle charging. It's what some people will do if they have a private garage, things like that. It really doesn't work that well in a community situation. Level 2 is on a 208 to 240 volt. On average, a vehicle is going to get about 23 to 25 miles of range, or a little bit more depending on how many amps we have to play with for every hour they're plugged in. And DC fast, that's where you're going to get 80% of your battery filled up in an hour.
Got it. So really for purposes of this discussion, and it's really all around level 2. Got it.
Yeah. Yep.
Mike, I want to get you involved in the conversation from an engineering standpoint. So if you could just take us back to the process that you guys went through there at the Bristol. How did you know if your community had the capacity to add EV charging stations? And what steps did you take specifically during that project management standpoint or process to make sure you had that determination capacity?
Right, thank you. So we had to have our electrical contractor kind of assess, because this wasn't really planned before the build. It was kind of talked about during the process of closing, or actually selling units before the construction was completed. So the electrical contractor had to assess what we have available and what kind of changes needed to be made. And that also at the time, charging systems were changing. They were 80 amps was the largest, and then it evolved to 100 amp systems for 240 volt. So we were kind of, right there at the edge of technology while we were installing. We also found out that we calculated how many chargers we might need. We found out that by adding larger chargers, 100 amp chargers, we could only install fewer charging units because of the capacity. So the electrical engineer said we can have this many circuits. They actually built a room for us for electrical chargers. So if we add on to it, we have to tap off of that room, and then we have breakers set up and everything ready to go. They only need to run the conduit to the parking space. And then we have valet parking. So valet has a station, 4 chargers in a quad station. They can rotate cars in and out of the fast charging and park them back in their parking spaces. And then the chargers that we have are set up with an account. So the resident sets up their account, pays them directly. We get a small little reimbursement check. We planned it all, gave all the information, and we kind of locked it in as, if you want a charger, this is the charger that you want. And the other option was there are 110 outlets throughout the garages, but not at every space. So there was a little bit of an option for that as well.
So Jake, I want to highlight something that Mike just said, right? So as we mentioned before, Bristol's set up specifically to be ready for this. And still the first step that they took was to work with an electrical engineer, right? So we really want to make sure that we're working with the professionals who can help get us to where we want to go.
Great point there. And just to add on, so specific, specific electrical contractors that do this? Is this, call up anybody, or what are the thoughts around which partners to get involved in terms of expertise?
Yeah, so in general, right, there is not much that's vastly specific to electric charging for the installation. Really, you work with, if you have a reputable, licensed electrician who comes highly recommended from whoever may be managing your community, they should be able to handle it. That being said, some vendors may have specific electric contractors that are familiar with them, and there could be some end of the day tie-ins that they're more familiar with and they're more easily able to do. But really, what we're looking for is a clean, professional, safe installation.
Got it. So gauge interest, survey your members. If there's interest, get it off the ground. And step one, from what I'm hearing, is to get an electrical contractor involved to figure out capacity first, regardless of whether it's a brand new property, a garden style, and a building that was built in the 70s. You got to understand capacity. Can we talk, so shifting kind of as we move down the timeline here, let's talk a little bit about cost involved. And Chris, can you start there? And maybe we kind of springboard off of, you get an electrical, contractor involved. What's that cost? What's the cost to the association? What costs should residents be incurring? And then maybe Jeff can jump in with different types of chargers and those costs. Let's talk about cost, because everyone, they're lighting up the Q&A board on cost.
Yeah. So when we're talking about cost, right, this is kind of what it all boils down to at the end of the day, right? So installation costs and ongoing costs are two different types of costs that I want to focus on. So when we're talking about installation costs, right, we're talking about the cost of the charger itself, the cost of the installation, and the cost of the labor for the installation. So of those three things, by far the least expensive is the charger. The cost of the conduit, the cost of the copper, even the permits are going to be more expensive in all likelihood, by an order of magnitude for the copper and the conduits than the chargers themselves, especially if you have to go a long distance. And then the cost of the labor as well is going to be very expensive. So when we are looking at how do we want to minimize some of those costs, when we're looking at the charger, the copper, and the labor, if we can minimize the run itself, that's going to reduce the copper cost, that's going to reduce the labor cost for the installation. So
and run being what distance from breaker to power source?
Yeah, thank you, Jake. Yeah, and that's what I mean, right? So where is the electrical supply and where are we doing the charging? The run would be the distance between the two. Now, something else I do want to highlight there, right, is the complexity of that installation. If we're talking about a parking garage or somewhere with some overhead structure or by the side structure, you can run the conduit along overhead in all likelihood. That may be an option. If we're talking about outdoor parking, it can get a lot more complicated with trenching, redoing paving, et cetera, right? So then that adds a whole different layer of costs. The other thing I do want to talk about real quick is ongoing costs, right? So what do we mean there? Generally speaking, by far the biggest cost we're talking about is going to be electricity. And the person with the electric vehicle paying for their own electricity is important in my mind, in the very least, because what we're talking about are communities, and we want to ensure that everyone is neighborly and happy at the end of the day, right? So we want to make sure that people are paying for their own electricity. Just like if Robert has an electric vehicle and I have a gas car, he's not paying for my gasoline. I want to make sure that I'm being fair to him and he's paying for his electricity. So working with a manufacturer that has intrinsically to the charger, metering, billing, and collections, and then taking all care of all of that and reimbursing the association for the energy that's consumed is really the way to go. If we're talking about one charger and one person, sure, Robert might be able to fit that hassle into his day. But if we're talking about a dozen different people getting all of the billing and invoicing and meter reading, like you can really quickly understand how much work that would entail if you're not using a charger that does that itself.
Yeah. Great points there all the way around. Just because we're talking about billing, Robert, from an administration standpoint, if you had to individually track down and meter read all the different meters, I would imagine that's pretty difficult. So can you talk about just the administration side of how you handle the cost on site and what implications for a manager there are when there's charging stations on site? Oh, you're on mute, Michael, or Robert, sorry.
Easy to say, it's not desirable.
Yeah,
So that's why systems like ChargePoint, Blink, so forth can provide all that back end billing, collections, and all that. And all we're doing is ensuring the power source, ensuring the continuity and workability of the unit.
so you get an automatic cloud-based type, report of who's used what, and then you're able to bill it back.
Well, actually, Blink handles, we have a Blink system, so that gets billed through Blink. So
Got it. Okay. Jeff, can you talk about different types of chargers and those costs? Just as we're on this cost discussion.
Yeah, I mean, so there's 3 different options for community. They can purchase the stations outright, they can go into an annual rental program, or they can reach out to a company like ChargePoint or Blink about what's called a host solution. So a host solution is when a company would come on site, the community would sign a contract, usually 6 to 8 years, allowing that company to install charging stations onto their property. And they would pay a portion of the cost for the electrical make-ready work as well. And then from there, they would charge the drivers for usage, on average, anywhere between 30 to 40 cents a kilowatt while they use the station. So that's what a host solution is. With that, the community kind of just gives up 2 or 4 spaces and says, here, you manage it. We don't want to be involved, and let this other third-party company come in and do this. The rental program is kind of the opposite, where the community manages it themselves. The station's rented on an annual basis. It includes full warranty, things like that, all the network services into a bundle. And that cost for like 2 plugs is right around $2,100 per year for 5 years. With that, the community also keeps 90% of the charging revenue. So if the community generates $1,000 a year in revenue after they pay the charging station, then they would keep 90% of that. So a lot of communities are going that route. That way they see almost as an amenity that will pay for itself, because as more cars come up, the more money they can make on the solution. It just really depends on which direction you want to go. And then last is just buying the stations outright. A level 2 station for a community, with your network costs and your warranties, things like that, anywhere between $8,000 to $12,000. And then a level 2 personal charging solution is going to cost the driver for their own personal charging station around $1,600 upfront for the station, and then they have a monthly cost after that.
Very
And I'd like to
interesting.
add to that if I could.
Yeah, please.
If you have a shared station and let's just say in a community where the resident is pulling up to the charging station and using it, and that costs through a company like ChargePoint, they have a card. They use their card to plug into the charger. When they charge the car actually communicates with the charger. So there's an interlink, network interlink there. And when they're done charging, they go park their car in their parking space. Another person comes, they're charged based upon that card and the amount of charge. So you can have one station and everybody gets charged individually, instead of the association trying to figure out how to charge how much for each car that charged for a short amount of time or a long period of time.
Yeah, great point there. What about incentives? You hear so we have folks on the call on the webinar from different states, different power companies. What companies or organizations are providing incentives to offset cost? How does that work within the confines of a common interest community? Chris, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a frequent topic of conversation. It depends on where you are. If you work with First Service Residential and there's somebody from First Service Energy in your area, we're happy to work with you through that process and really handle it hand in hand with you. That being said, I believe a majority of the people on this call are from the state of Florida. The largest electrical provider in the state of Florida does not offer any sort of incentives or rebates, however you want to phrase it, for the installation of charging stations. Some other municipalities, or utilities do. So if you're in a different state, or if you're working with other vendors in northern or central Florida, you may have some opportunities there to find some rebates. But if you're an FPL customer, there are none.
Got it. Is there any question that I didn't ask or anything that we did not touch on from any of the panelists? Do you want to chime in on anything else regarding cost?
Yeah, right. So I did hear a couple of things about host systems, and I understand why they're attractive. And that's because they're low cost or no cost upfront to install. And that's really a pretty and attractive solution.
And the host, just for the audience, so the host is meaning it's all outsourced to a third party?
Yeah. And
okay.
The problem when you do that is that people then that the association loses control of what they're going to charge for the electricity. Most associations that we manage in the state of Florida and as well as Georgia pay roughly 10 cents per kilowatt hour, maybe less, 7 cents, 8 cents per kilowatt hour. And a kilowatt hour is just a unit of electrical energy. Remember those numbers, right? 7, 8, 9, 10 cents per kilowatt hour. If a host company comes in and dictates what the cost of that electricity is going to be, typically it's going to be around 30 or 40 cents per kilowatt hour. So 3 or 4 times that, right? So if even more, so I've seen 50 cents and upwards, and I heard 60 cents in some other areas of the country. The cost thought process of a vehicle owner of an EV, electrical vehicles are a lot cheaper to run. That's based on cheap electricity. If all of a sudden that cost of that electricity goes up 4 or 5 times, they're going to be less likely to use that, at which point you've just went through the whole rigmarole of installing an amenity that people aren't going to use. So no one's happy in the end, other than not paying the bill up front. And there are some ways to go through, and we're happy to work with you through that at First Service Energy, or to figure out how do we recoup some of that money that we put out on the front end. So I really try to encourage people to at least maintain control of what that cost of the energy to the end user is going to be.
Got it. We have tons of questions pouring in, so we have a couple more questions, and then we'll dive into freeform Q&A. So Jeff, we're kind of moving out of cost for a second. Any legal issues that, and feel free anyone to jump in, but Jeff, any legal issues communities should know about with implementing these?
I just think the one thing I would add is Florida has a pretty broad condo law for residents that was enacted a few years ago that gives residents the right to add EV charging. I just think I would suggest any property manager that has a resident bring that up to them and saying they want to put in their own station, involve a vendor pretty soon to that conversation. Just because you don't want to allow your residents to kind of take control of the electrical room and start having full access and doing whatever they want, because it's going to lead to a point where there's no power left. And now you're at a bigger concern where the resident, 1, 2, and 3 have this, but now no one else can get it. And it'll just cause chaos. So definitely, once residents start asking for it, or prior, like reach out to a vendor, have them come out and meet with you and the board and start kind of explaining all the options to you up front so you can kind of get ahead of that conversation.
Yeah, so a little bit sharper point on what Jeff just said. Caveat to this, he's not a lawyer and I'm not a lawyer, so work with your association attorney. It's my understanding as a non-lawyer that condos in the state of Florida cannot stop people from installing chargers in their own personal deeded parking spaces. Now, that what that means is not that you have no say in the matter, that the condo has no say in the matter, right? So Jeff had mentioned the electrical closet. It's not first come, first serve in there. That's why having a plan and having an approach really is a good idea. Also, we want to make sure that this is a safe installation, right? So we can have a short list of vendors who are allowed to install electrical equipment in the common areas, right? In the parking garage, in the electrical room. So we want to have a short list of 1, 2, 3 vendors who are electricians who we trust as an association to do that. Also, to Robert's point earlier, we don't want to have 18 different electrical vehicle charging companies on site at once, because that's 18 different vendors he has to touch base with every single month to ensure the association is getting reimbursed for the energy. So really streamlining that to one company, I think, makes sense.
Excellent. So really creating a program is critical so that it's not a free for all. Robert, Michael, I kind of saw you guys shaking your heads a little bit, but so there's the legal ramifications, but then there's rules and regulations in creating the program on site. So what, I mean, from a rules and regulations standpoint and getting the board to vote on certain things to get this thing implemented, can you talk a little bit about that from your experience doing that from an administration standpoint and management standpoint?
Yeah, excuse me. Yes, from our standpoint, from the beginning, again, new building, that kind of developer situation, it was initially put in the condominium docs that the expense would be borne by the owner. So the developer put the infrastructure in, the association has the infrastructure, and now whether those runs from our main EV charging room to their parking space or other, that all that's and the charging station itself are borne by an individual that wants it for their particular space. We have enough for the community, so to speak, and we're probably going to add some more at some point as this grows. But it's for some older associations, they may not have it in their condo docs or rules. That will be extremely important to look at with your attorney to get that implemented, because the association does not need to bear the expense if someone wants it for their individual space. That's an individual expense.
Jake, you're muted.
Sorry about that. It helps when the host does not have a mute button on. No, I was just saying, it's just, it's important to work with an electrical engineer for capacity and in a parallel scheme, working for an attorney on your documents and your governing documents to make sure everything's in line. All right, so we'll kind of wrap up the discussion and move into questions, but kind of last question for Robert and Michael from a practical standpoint, because you guys implemented it. Just tell us about your experience at the Bristol. Would you do anything different from start to finish and where you are now? And what did you learn through the process that would be beneficial to everyone who's on the call today?
It was a great experience overall. I learned a lot. Robert and I really worked a long time with a lot of meetings and a lot of companies, a lot of options to try to really, key in on what we wanted to do. And then with the rules and regulations part of it, this is the type of charger we use, that you pay this and that's it. We get the electrician out, we control everything. I think as far as what would we do different, I kind of found that over time, people for their personal spaces really needed an individual 110 outlet for every single space. And I think that would be the only thing I would have changed, was be adding a 110 outlet to every single space. A lot of people don't drive their electric cars very far here. They drive a little bit and they park, and the car might sit for a day or day and a half We actually have vehicles that our valet can drive them places. So they slow charge and they're happy with that. They don't ever really drive, 50 miles back and forth and then have to fast charge it. So I think the only thing I would change is adding an individual outlet at each space. And I think we would have had to eliminate adding a few outlets that we've already added for owners, which they've paid for, by the way. So.
Yeah, so when you're questioning your owners on, whether to add or how many to add, and those are some of the questions you can ask. Someone might do daily driving that's more than what our owners do, the local driving. So that will fit into your equation.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to kind of wrap it up, I mean, how has you guys have started, completed, and now it's ongoing administration of it, but how has the charging station impacted your community from a property value standpoint, from a lifestyle standpoint? What are the residents saying about having this amenity in their community?
Well, it's for probably 15, 18 owners. It's a necessity. It's not really just an amenity. What we're also looking at is that this whole industry of electric vehicle chargers are growing. I don't know if the percentages are pretty high, what they're going to sell and purchase in the 2025 and 2030. And maybe Jeff can comment on that, but we're going to have to add more chargers down the road. It's going to be not necessarily amenity. It's going to be a demand.
Yeah, great point. All right. We've got questions. Feel free, Mike, Jeff, Robert, Chris, to jump in. I'm just going to go down the list. We probably won't be able to get to every question, but let's get started. So we've heard some things on the news. You've seen some news stories about safety concerns, battery storage, fire code. What safety concerns should a condominium, an HOA who's installing this, what should they be worried about?
Yeah, right. So that's a question that I get every once in a while, and it's been more popular recently. I think that it's in the news, or people are writing articles about it. That's why it's coming up. And that really is, the end of the day, is the thing to keep in mind. Any sort of safety issue with an electric vehicle from a fire perspective is an order of magnitude less likely in an electric vehicle than it would be in an internal combustion engine vehicle. The stats from the National Transportation Board is something along the lines of 55 per billion miles driven versus 5 per billion miles driven. Right? That's a gigantic difference. So keeping in mind that electric vehicles are way safer. Also keep in mind, just like I'm not a lawyer, I am also not a fire marshal. So speaking directly with the folks who are responsible for your building code or working with your property manager or First Service Energy to help you through that process, happy to do so. It is my understanding that most fire prevention professionals treat electric vehicles no differently from a code perspective than traditional internal combustion engines typically. Now, that being said, we are working on some SOPs around that. Biggest and most important, right, is ensure that the professionals are handling any sort of emergencies. If you have an issue, get away from it, call 911. If you're able to shut the electricity off, that's local there. If there is an electric, sure, but get away from it. Let the firefighters handle it.
Got it. Next question. Our condo has a garage under the building with assigned parking spaces. What options do you see for installing a charging station when there are no unassigned spaces? So everything's assigned.
Sure. If there are 0 guest parking spaces, that kind of ties your hands to not doing shared charging. And that's kind of where we talked about originally, that there's no cookie cutter for this, right? It's if your bottleneck is electrical capacity, you go one route. If your bottleneck is no spaces, like this individual is mentioning, then you are going to individual charging at the end of the day.
This is an interesting one. How about electrical boats and engines coming out? Anything can be done. We have communities that have marinas. Any thought, Jeff, on that, on what can be done for marinas?
I mean, when it comes down to it, it's, you know, it's a lot of them will use the same plug, or they just do, you know, like a marina. If you go to a marina, they all have the slips that have the piers that have the power in them. So a lot of times the marinas already have the power available. It's just how they configure that for both plugging in the boat and then also charging the boat. But if you talk to the boat manufacturers, we haven't really gotten into that much, but a lot of the boat manufacturers have charging solutions directly for those products.
Interesting.
If you do go that route, we do want to keep in mind the same things that we're talking about for the electric cars, ensuring that the person using the electricity is paying for the electricity and not the association, right? So a lot of those marina aquatic solutions are gonna maybe not be as mature as some of the electric car charging solutions. So we want to make sure that there's a metering component in there.
Got it. How did Bristol compensate those owners that don't use the EV charging station? In other words, how do you reconcile extra electricity assessments to the general population for the few that use the shared power system? I think this is a common question. Just understand, and we've kind of touched on it, but can we answer that question there?
Honestly, it hasn't come up yet because it hasn't been. We don't think it's a big number yet. It's a quantifiable number, but it's not a big number. But I'm sure that will come up at some point. We haven't addressed it.
And right, to make sure that we're answering the question that that was asked, and I'm not sure which way the person that asked it was intending. So most of the charging solutions have a meter installed inside of it. That meter charges your RFID, which is associated with your credit card. They receive the money, they reimburse the association for the electricity. Now, if the other question that Robert, I think was answering is if someone, if condo installs chargers, if I have a gas car, I don't want to have to pay for the installation of those chargers. Well, keep in mind that as this becomes more popular, and I don't think anyone on this call would argue that it's not becoming more popular, it is becoming an amenity that people insist upon, right? So if I want to buy a unit in a condo, I'm going to insist that they have a gym. I'm going to insist that they have a pool. The people that are not using the gym or pool are not reimbursed for their lack of using those amenities. Just like if I'm looking for a condo and I have a Chevy Bolt or a Tesla or a BMW i3 or whatever, I want to have charging solutions at that association. Having this at your association increases property values at that association. And I've not seen anyone disagree with that.
Got it. Amenity that not everyone has to use. So this is I think about this often when I'm downtown and I see, you know, the shared spaces, but how do you ensure, you know, from a shared space that people don't leave their vehicle there for a week? Like if they, you know, they plug it in and it's done charging and they're using the space and somebody else needs to use it. Like how does that work?
Jeff, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so with ChargePoint, we have what's called idle fees. So obviously the board selects the pricing that they want to charge drivers for usage. And then once the vehicle is done charging, traditionally the station will stop charging them. So what ChargePoint has in our software is called idle fees, meaning after the vehicle is fully charged, the board says you have 30 minutes or you have an hour to come out and move your vehicle. If you don't come out and unplug and move your vehicle after an hour, then we're going to start charging you an idle fee of $2 or $5 an hour for every hour that your vehicle is now sitting there blocking the station so no one else can charge. So usually that's enough of a deterrent to get people to come out there and move their vehicle. And that's how you can, you know, ensure people don't just park their car there on Friday and leave it there till Monday.
Got it.
Most other vendors do, the major players do have that. No, shaking your head.
Now, most vendors have the ability to charge by hour or by kilowatt. So if you're charging by kilowatt and that's it, once the vehicle is full, then it's no longer charging and the vehicle is just sitting there.
Oh, wow. You learned
Very
something.
interesting. So the key differentiator there is idle fees, where it's a disincentive to keep it on there when it's already charged.
Yeah, so I mean, you could another vendor can change it instead of charging by kilowatts. They can say we're going to charge you by hour. So then every hour your vehicle is plugged in, then they're just going to keep on charging you, no matter if you're actually charging or not. That's kind of their
Sure.
workaround. But we have the ability to charge you both ways.
Gotcha. There's a mobile app for all this, right? Like if you plug it up, okay, just like Park Mobile, which is okay. Got it.
All the vendors have mobile apps.
Got it.
Along those lines, right? One of the features that I've been asked about are, well, I see a car there. How do I know when it'll be vacant? A lot of those apps do have a queue process that you'll see how many people are waiting in line for that charger.
Chris, Jeff, Robert, Mike, what's the cost for an electrical engineering survey, right? Like you want to get it started, have an engineer to come out to give you a capacity study or whatever exactly it's called. What is that? $2 grand, $5 grand, 10 grand? Like what are your thoughts there?
What I've seen in South Florida, it's a little bit more expensive in other parts, just purely due to how busy they are. But on average, it's around 2,500 for an electrical engineer to come out and do the survey and draw the plans, which is usually what is required to obtain a permit.
Yep. We're bouncing around here, but we're just trying to get through questions. This is about, we've had a number of these questions about material alterations. If you're adding outlets, and adding, is it a material alteration, Robert? Like clearly, you got to consult your attorney. We're not attorneys here, but how do we deal with membership votes, regarding material alterations in electrical vehicles?
Good question. And it depends on the type of spot and how the assignment is made for that space. So that's a legal question.
Okay, so purely legal.
I can tell you that, again, I'm not an attorney. I have seen installations done a lot in the state of Florida for associations we manage, maybe 100, maybe more. I know that material alterations are very difficult to do from a vote perspective. So it would lead me to believe that it's been done successfully without material alteration votes. But again, I'm not an attorney. Talk to your lawyer.
So let's say you pay $2,500 or 10 grand to, come out whatever the cost is to have an electrical engineer talk about capacity. What if you just don't have capacity? What is that route when you don't have capacity in your current grid?
It's very common, honestly, especially if a building was built in the 70s or 80s, which a lot of them, along the water are. Basically, you have to then have the utility bring in either upsize the transformer that the building has, or just bring in additional power. FPL is pretty good. I mean, the challenge is getting on their project timeline, which could take 6 months just for that to happen. But they will usually upgrade the transformer or bring in more power at no additional cost, knowing that it's going to be used and they're going to get, they're going to get their money's worth for it.
Yeah.
It's just starting that process. So once you talk to an electrician, they say there's no power, the electricians usually will engage with the utility and start that process for you.
Yeah. Keep in mind the electrical utility wants to sell you electricity. So they're typically incentivized to work with you. I have seen some other creative solutions before too, is that sometimes, and very, very rarely, like maybe a handful of times, residents have been able to tie into their own personal meters, which actually forgoes a major chunk of this whole cost conversation. Because if you're using your own power, you're installing in your own space. Great.
Yeah.
Real quick, Jake, while you're looking
go
at
ahead.
the next question, one thing I do want to mention, and because it is so popular, right? So Teslas are the electric vehicle that everyone thinks about when they think about electric vehicles. Tesla does have their own proprietary charger. Tesla chargers work with Tesla vehicles. They do not work with non-Teslas. Also, it is not the right solution for community living. And that's because they do not have a meter installed or the ability to invoice, collect, and reimburse an association. So whenever someone gets a Tesla, they may have already bought a Tesla charger. The next conversation that Robert gets to have is, sorry, Steve, you're going to have to get a different vendor's unit for your charger.
solar powered stations?
No is the answer to that. And that for a few reasons, right? So electricity is fungible. So when you create electricity through solar photovoltaics, it just goes into the big bucket that is the electrical system of the building, and it reduces the overall consumption from the utility. Now, if we're talking about independent, off in a field, solar panels, charging cars, sure, that's possible. Keep in mind that the amount of juice that electric vehicles consume at any given moment is a lot, right? So the level 2 chargers that Jeff was talking about earlier, roughly 30, 40 amps at 240 volt. You need a lot of panels to get that type of juice. So you would have to install batteries and you'd have to install a lot of panels. The answer is no.
It's just not cost effective right now. Okay. Robert, what about condo insurance premiums? Did you guys have to get your insurance provider involved? Is there any additional insurance requirements?
Not that was delineated on our insurance policy, but it gets covered in a inspection when your insurance inspectors come through and inspect the building and see how many you have, see where you have them, how you have them set up.
Yeah. And more generally, right? So again, I'm not an insurance professional, but I did speak with John Lee, the Vice President of First Service Financial, about this topic specifically. And what he told me was that you do want to, as Robert mentioned, make sure that they are insured, just like everything else in the building, just like boilers, just like pool heaters, just like chillers and cooling towers. That being said, it has not impacted the insurance premiums at associations that we are aware of, specifically that. Now, insurance is a whole different conversation, and definitely keep in mind FFI's webinars on that. But yeah, it does not specifically increase insurance premiums that we've seen.
And I would imagine they need to be added to the reserve study as a consideration.
Yeah.
Question, would you normally hook these charging stations up to emergency generator output? Is this allowed? Does this make sense?
That's a great question. Kudos to whoever asked it. That's talk to your engineer, whoever your MEP engineer is for your specific facility. Definitely going to want to talk to them. I don't know. Jeff, thoughts?
I have not seen that. Traditionally, the problem is the dedicated emergency power source already is usually peaked out. You know, when you build the building,
that's really a good point.
Max it out for like the elevators and the hallway lighting, things like that. So the amount of power you need to EV charging, you just normally never have the space. So
That's a really good point. If you're running on if you're running on an emergency generator for a week, just that thing alone is going to upsize the generator that you need in an association so much, because really you're talking about emergency lighting, a single elevator, maybe water pumps. Throwing an EV charger or a bank of EV chargers on top of that would just increase the draw substantially.
Does Duke Energy provide any incentives for community charger installation?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure. Jeff?
Duke's previous program ended. They have a new program coming that's waiting for some approval from the state. So I would just say go to Duke's site, or you can Google Duke. I think it's called a Plug and Park program, Park and Plug, something like that. And they'll tell you, you can see the updates on that, and you can enter your email address. They'll provide you the updates on the next round of projects available that is supposed to be coming out later this year.
And First Service Energy is happy to help you with that process too.
So hypothetically, if you had a 100-unit condominium and you had a 110-volt outlet at every single space, how would you build them from an administration standpoint?
Yeah, right. So that's a great question. And it kind of gets to how, hypothetically again, right? Like if I'm working with a property and that situation arises, they are dedicated to dedicated charging. I like that little pun there. A solution that I like is having the association install what I'll call the backbone, right? Having the association incur those costs to install the line from the electrical room throughout each floor of the parking garage, and then have the resident cover the cost to tie into that system, as well as some additional fee to help the association recoup that initial investment, right? I like that solution. I think that if an association has the finances available, that'll keep the installation itself clean and really professional looking and safe, as well as assume that the resident is going to end up incurring the costs that they are responsible for.
What are the biggest challenges with installing EV stations in older communities that do not have garages or assigned spaces?
Biggest challenges? I mean, if they don't have assigned spaces and they don't have garages, the installation itself is going to end up so let's make some assumptions here, right? We're talking about parking lots, not parking garages. We're talking about association-owned spaces, not deeded spaces. That it's kind of pretty open then. So an association, if they own the slots, then they can install charging in guest spaces. That being said, if they're open slots, Bob, who's got a new Tesla Y, can't install a charger in his space. So it kind of ties you to the shared amenity common element chargers.
Got it. Let's see. How can I contact ChargePoint? We in the chat screen, Jeff, his information is there. We've also put in electrical vehicle charging checklist that you can access if you go to the chat function. You can go there. We are just running out of time here. Let's pick one more question. If you see me kind of scrolling, that's what I'm doing. I'm looking through all the questions. Let's see. Can you get an adapter for Teslas? I feel like Tesla is always like a big question. Like, how do we do it?
There is an adapter that Tesla owners can use on common plugs. There may be one the other way, but I'm not sure.
Got it. As we wind this down, any final thoughts from the panelists? Feel free to jump in and kind of give your final thoughts. Chris?
My biggest thing is something we covered earlier, right? So we want to make sure when an association is going down this road, down this path, that it is well thought out and it's planned, because if it's the wild, wild west in an electrical closet, and I've seen it done before, they bring me in to the conversation after there's already 3 chargers installed. There's not going to be any electrical capacity. You're going to have 3 people that are not paying for the electricity that they consume. There's going to be 4 different styles of chargers, which makes Robert's job a lot more complicated. So if you're not down this journey yet, we could help you create your process. And at the end of the day, having a plan is very important, as this conversation has highlighted.
Absolutely. Robert, do you have any final thoughts from your perspective and being a manager?
I think we're just trying to plan for who's going to have an EV next, how many are going to happen next year, next couple of years, just so we know what we need to add along the way. But I agree with Chris. You got to have a plan and have an idea of what kind of demand there's going to be from your owners to see if you can accommodate that, or how we grow with that.
Absolutely. Common theme, having a plan. If it hasn't already taken off of your community, it will. And Robert, like you said, it's not necessarily an amenity as I described it. It's going to be a necessity. So, Mike, any from a building engineer perspective, any thoughts for the group here?
Yes, just like you said, with the plan, you have to be strict with the plan. You have to have an electrician you trust. That's a super, super important part of it. Some electricians, I don't want to talk bad about electricians, but some electricians may cut corners. You just want to have somebody that you really can trust will do the job right. You can't hold their hand the whole time while they're doing the job. And they will have the right people at their capacity that can come out and make sure that they're running the right wires, they're running the right size wires, they're not overloading the system. Trust, you have to have somebody you can trust. I think that's the key, a good electrician.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a plan, get a great electrician.
Yep. The rest
Jeff?
is the chargers and the process, but the
Yeah.
electrician is super, super important.
Absolutely. Jeff?
Last thing I just want to add is understand the timeline. So the charging piece is the easy piece. The permitting and the electrical engineering process, that's usually a minimum 5 to 6 month process. So if you're looking to do something this year, you need to start immediately. If you need to start for budgeting for next year, you really want to start immediately. So it's not something that you can just meet with a company and say, well, I want chargers, and they're there in a month. So it's really understanding all the people that have to be involved and getting on everyone's schedules. And especially in Florida, where our construction schedules are so busy right now, trying to get through permitting and electrical engineering can take a long, long time. So you want to make sure that you understand those timelines. Great
piece. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. Well, Robert, Jeff, Chris, Mike, you guys are rock stars. Thank you for this important discussion. The questions are continuing to come in. I'm sorry we don't have more time. We might just have to bring you guys back and just do a Q&A, because I mean, folks are very interested in that and they're asking great questions. We got to a lot of questions. We covered a lot of ground, but thank you to all of our attendees for joining us. We hope you have found this information useful as you go on this journey together. We'll get this recording out to you as soon as possible. Feel free to share it with folks. And we may just be back with this panel to answer more questions. So I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, wherever you are, and a great weekend as it's coming. Well, I guess it's only Wednesday, but the weekend's coming. So anyways, thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Thank
Jake.
you.